Welcome to our latest installment of ABL Advisors video series featuring leaders from the commercial finance industry. Today, I'd like to welcome our guest, Laurie Montplaisir. Laurie is a shareholder with the firm Robbins, Solomon, and Patt, where our areas of practice include banking and finance, business transactions, commercial lending and factoring, and litigation. Thanks very much for being with us today, Laurie.
Thank you.
I'd like to start right in on our discussion today, which is about bankruptcy and what's happening in the bankruptcy world since the pandemic began. First question I have is, according to the ABI, total commercial Chapter 11 filings in July increased 52% from the previous year. What are you personally hearing from your ABL and factoring clients today?
Well, definitely hearing that bankruptcies are increasing. Bankruptcies really affect asset-based lenders and factors in two ways. One is obviously a client bankruptcy, a bankruptcy of an ABL or a factor, and then the bankruptcy of an account debtor, which has real implications, especially in the factoring world. Factors aren't really looking for their clients for repayment. They're looking for repayment for the account debtors. So even if a factoring client, for example, goes bankrupt, the factor is typically looking to the account debtor to collect the funds. So it does have an impact with the number of account debtor bankruptcies. And the same thing for an asset-based lender. Their collateral is a lot of times accounts that they can collect upon an event of default under a UCC. So bankruptcies really have an impact in both the factoring world and the asset-based lending world.
Do you expect that this trend is going to continue over the next 6 to 12 months because of the environment that we're in?
I do. I do think it's going to continue once we get past the fourth quarter. I think as we enter the new year, we'll see a lot of bankruptcies after the holiday season. We've kind of been hit by this triple threat here, right? We have the coronavirus, we have companies that were saddled with a great deal of debt to start with going into the coronavirus, and then we just generally have a change in consumer spending habits, the way people are traveling, the way that people are spending money. So I definitely think we can expect that the bankruptcy trend will continue.
And you said that after the fourth quarter, is that because you're anticipating a change or a decline of some sort in the holiday spending and the consumer habits during the holidays?
I think that that's a reasonable expectation, particularly with the unemployment and just the uncertainty that's happening in almost all economic sectors.
Okay, good. Thank you. Now, the increase in bankruptcy filings presents opportunities, obviously, too, for lenders to provide DIP facilities to various borrowers. In that scenario, what are the top 2 or 3 issues that should be addressed with a borrower or a debtor seeking a DIP facility? And have those priorities changed since the crisis began?
Well, I think it's somewhat counterintuitive a lot of times for people to think, oh, DIP financing is a good idea, right? Especially, you have a company in bankruptcy, and especially now in bankruptcy doing a pandemic that causes a lot of uncertainty. But DIP financing presents an opportunity that's right in what factors and asset-based lenders do, which is they provide revolving working capital facilities. So I definitely think that there's a lot of opportunity there. Obviously, the bankruptcy code provides a lot of protections to DIP financing, so there's a real opportunity there. I would say for the top 2 or 3 issues that asset-based lenders and factors should be concerned about, those haven't changed. I think, in fact, now they're more important than ever. One, you want to make sure going into DIP financing that you have a priming lien, for example, so that you have a super priority lien and over other creditors and over the assets. Secondly, you certainly want to make sure that you have provisions in the orders that say, this is especially true for factoring, that acknowledges that it's a true sale of the accounts and the factors own the accounts and that they're outside of the estate, because that's very important in the event that there's a liquidation. Also, just as a practical matter, it's a good idea to get a large upfront fee, deposit fee, before you go into a DIP financing situation, because typically they can be expensive, right? And you want to make sure that you are getting your fee up front and that you're reviewing all the orders, you know, the first day orders, the interim orders, what will be the final orders. Again, particularly for factors, it's a little bit of a different situation because you're actually purchasing the accounts. So a lot of kind of template forms that bankruptcy attorneys use refer to borrowing and lending as opposed to the purchase of accounts. So I know I just reviewed DIP financing last week for a factor, and we had to go back and make changes to the interim order, unfortunately, after it had been entered, because there were references to borrowing and references to lending, and we're actually purchasing the accounts, which is a different area.
And that's common, correct? That's been the case even before the crisis. It's just that you're maybe seeing more activity right now. Is that correct?
Yes, we're seeing more activity, and interestingly, I think activity that's moving a little bit faster.
Faster meaning through the system, or faster with the lenders and the debtors?
Faster for the filings, right? So, you know, I had a factor that, you know, they wanted to do the filing within a week. So if you're getting your first day orders in place and you're trying to get the language correct for the interim order and the other first day filings, it was just moving. Some of the bankruptcies are moving fairly quickly.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay. Many businesses are experiencing liquidity issues and as a result are requesting over advances or other financial accommodations. Should ABLs and factors be adjusting their credit underwriting practices to meet those needs? Do you have any advice that you would give to the ABLs and factors in this environment?
I don't think this is the environment to be adjusting underwriting criteria and structures. I think, in fact, it's the time to really be making sure that you have robust practices and that everybody's following them. When you talk about liquidity issues, I mean, what I'm seeing is two very different extremes, right? You have clients who they need over advances or they need financial accommodations just to meet payroll on Friday and just to survive. I mean, they're literally on a week by week basis. That's a much different situation, which is the more positive one, where you have a client that's growing rapidly. For example, an existing client, I know one of my factors had an existing client that was able to convert over to make PPE. So obviously the demand there was huge. So I think the first part of the analysis is, why are they looking for the over advance? Why are they looking for the additional financial accommodations? And then, you know, how are you going to structure that? If the structure for someone who's just trying to survive on a week-to-week basis is going to be different from a client that's growing rapidly and is going to have orders and more accounts coming in the door.
Okay, great. That makes sense. Now, are there any new or additional preference or fraudulent conveyance exposure risks that ABLs and factors should consider in this current lending environment?
Well, I think because of the fact that bankruptcies are increasing and generally everyone anticipates that going forward, I think ABLs and factors should just be familiar with what preferences are and how a preference payment is defined. I mean, there's a pretty specific definition of what a preference payment is. And there's also defenses to preference payments. So for example, with factors who are purchasing accounts and looking for payment on account debtor, one of the defenses against a preference claim is paying in the ordinary course of business. So just making sure that you are tracking potential, you know, account debtors that you think potentially may be in bankruptcy as to what their payment terms are. Are they paying in the ordinary course? Are they giving value for the goods and not just taking payments for older products? So by being aware of the preference claim, potential preference claims, hopefully you can kind of protect yourself against those.
Okay, great, thank you. The last question I have is about the CARES Act. And now the CARES Act provided businesses with, you know, much needed injections of liquidity. Most could not have survived without it in some manner. Are there any risks that ABLs and factors should be considering when working with a company that has received stimulus money, does that create some new concerns and issues that an ABL or factor should really be considering when they're analyzing the client?
Well, I think there was a lot of confusion nationwide on everybody's part when the CARES Act first came out and the monies were going out the door as to kind of what this was going to look like, right? So I think one of the concerns now is as the money is running out and as people start, businesses have to start repaying potentially, that the ABLs and the factors are kind of watching their clients from that perspective. Also, for example, money that went through the PPP program was generally unsecured, but there were other other ways to get funds, for example, the Main Street Act that required a security interest. So it's important for ABLs and factors to understand if a security interest has been filed and what the rights are, and making sure that the clients are meeting whatever obligations that they have for the money they've taken under the CARES Act. And is the money starts to run out, is this a client that's going to be able to survive? Did the CARES Act money just kind of kick the can down the road, right? And that analysis has to be done. A lot of my clients initially, when ABL and factoring clients took PPP money or other money through the CARES Act, did amendments to their documents, because typically receiving money from another lender or another source would be an event of default or a breach of a loan agreement or factoring agreement. So hopefully at the time, the ABL lender, the factor, has documented this as, is an addendum or an amendment to the loan documents. And in the amendments I did, we typically acknowledge the funds, and we had the client agree that they were going to follow all of the rules and regulations of the CARES Act and repay the funds as required.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to throw one more question in, if you don't mind, and that is that there's been discussion that the bankruptcy courts have slowed down dramatically because of the crisis, that things are not moving through the process the way they were. Is that still going on? Is it starting to move more into a flow the way it used to move in being able to actually go through the bankruptcy process?
Well, I think initially, virtually every court slowed down or shut down. So there was just, like every other business, there was an adjustment in the courts on how this was going to be dealt with. Bankruptcy obviously is in federal court. So I feel like that is starting to move a little bit faster as opposed to a lot of the state court cases. But I do think the new way of having hearings and moving forward, combined with the number of bankruptcies I think that can be expected, I do think the process is going to be a little slower than it was prior to the pandemic.
And that's why I say in all these interviews, I seem to end it the same way: we shall see.
We shall see.
Well, with that, I'd like to wrap it up, Laurie. I'd like to thank you very much for your time today and for your insights into what's happening in the market for both ABLs and factors. Some real good information there for our viewers. And again, thank you for your time today. And I hope that you stay healthy and that your team stays healthy as well.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.